You're listening to 3rd Wave Trade Talks, a podcast that explores the dynamic world of global trade and compliance. I'm Grant Sernick, Head of Sales and Marketing at 3rd Wave, where we empower businesses to master the complexities of international trade. Join me as I sit down with industry experts, innovators, and thought leaders to explore the trends, challenges, and insights that shape the future of global trade. All right, we are live. I want to welcome to the podcast Gregg Cummings from Strix. Welcome, Greg.
How are you, Grant? How's Canada?
I'm doing great. In fact, it's Monday and we're rolling. So, Greg, can you give us a little bit, introduce yourself, so that people understand who you are and why you're well positioned to have the conversation that we're going to have.
Well, I don't know how well positioned I am. You can decide that, yourselves. But no, my name's Gregg Cummings. I'm the president of Strix, TBI Brokers Inc., and we are both a software platform for customs filings, ISF, and customs entries, as well as a full service broker in the United States.
Right on. So, a little spoiler alert, we're going to be talking today around the topic of customs brokers and the relationship of a broker and an importer and what makes them, why they're complementary and why they're different. And that's important for many people listening. There are a lot of importers that listen to this podcast. And we're also going to talk about self-filing. One of Strix's unique things is that they are both a full-service customs broker, and also they're a software platform that supports their customers' self-filing, an ISF customs entry PGA files, and that makes them extremely unique in the United States. And so I want to explore that idea as well and how Greg came to sort of the spot he's in. So, Greg, maybe can you walk us through a little bit of your history and how you got to Bozeman, Montana, which is where you're located today?
God's country, that's right. Well, I started off, I was in investment banking for 20 years in Chicago. And a large part of the securities that I was involved with all blew up in 2008. And so my illustrious career, I was thanked by the investment bank for my time and allowed to pursue other things, as often happens in that business. And I already had a place out in Montana, and so when I went out to Montana and looked for ideas on things to do, and I found a company who had owners who were from Chicago, so there was a kind of a nice match there, and I got involved, learned a little bit about what the business was. At that time, it was only a software platform for self-filing, and I got involved, and I wanted to also, just through some of the interaction we had with our self-filers, stand up a brokerage because there seemed to be a very complementary need for that. So we did that, a little over 10 years ago, stood up the brokerage. I've been at the company now 17 years. And brokerage has grown quite a bit because there is just this synergy between importers who are doing it themselves. Obviously, the customer service side of that is held by licensed customs brokers who are clearing entries every day. So they are right in the middle of what's going on with customs, which could not be more of a moving target, it seems, especially in the past couple of years. Regulations have changed quite a bit. So even if you're pretty adept at the data side of entering, what you need to enter to self-file your ISF and your customs entry, there are still very quirky things that happen in customs responses. So it works out very nicely to have that conversation. And the other reason why we got involved with that was many of our self-filers didn't have the resources to do all of their filings. And once you kind of make that break from your old customs broker, sometimes that relationship is a little bit less than it was before. And so it just made sense for us to get involved in clearing those entries they didn't have the resources to do, because we would then be in there as broker learning a lot about their business, how the data that was involved, how they were fashioning their entries, even down to the classification in a lot of places. And so that conversation could get could help them improve the processes that they had in place, as well as us getting to know them to help us on the clearance side. And as you know, I mean, one of the reasons you and I know each other, gosh, going back 12 or 14 years now, it's very long. It seems like a very long time, was automation and grabbing the data that's out there in ERPs, and, even from something as simple as spreadsheets all the way up to direct feeds out of the ERP. And, automation was very new when you and I started working, back in those days. And now it's ubiquitous to the industry, to the point where AI is now assisting automation in ways that I guess we all had hoped over time might be able to read that documentation.
Well, so, it's interesting when we talk about it, because my feeling is, automation is probably not the right term. It is automation. There's no doubt that it is, but it's an overly broad term to explain. Like, I agree that automation is everywhere, except it's kind of one of these things that's kind of it's everywhere, but it's nowhere, because the promise that automation writ large was supposed to deliver, which would be something like taking a commercial invoice that's on a PDF, somehow at the other end getting to a customs entry or a customs entry PGA files, ISF, whatever it is, doesn't outside of 3rd doesn't really exist, right? And I'm constantly sort of floored by this fact. Right. So if you look at, there were sort of two major players that I would have expected that this should not be a conversation anymore. Right. So Flexport is one of them, where the promise of Flexport was that they should be able to basically automate a shipment into a customs entry and have that filed and do it for virtually free, or at least from a cost perspective on the Flexport side, be able to take that, convert it to an entry and file it. Apparently that doesn't exist at Flexport, and that's one of their big problems. And then the other player that I thought ought to have cracked this nut a long time ago is CargoWise, that supplies software to the vast majority of the large freight forwarders, that also hasn't been able to figure out how to get a customs entry, a commercial invoice automated into a customs entry on behalf of their customers.
Yeah, and there's a reason for that. And I think you and I both experience that almost every day, because every single importer, they could all have the same ERPs, but their data is fashioned in a different way in every instance of what they have. So, and in our business in particular, that beautiful goal of getting a commercial invoice and packing list digitized essentially is all they're doing. It's there, but that's like, okay, now I took the ball on the 20-yard line and I moved it to the 25 or the 30. I got 70 yards to go now, because you have so much relational data that has to be incorporated in order to fashion a customs entry. So you have that dual problem of everybody's data is different, and then you've got to figure out how to get everybody's different data into one data set that customs has to have in order to file a particular entry. Even if there's no PGAs, you still have to have the customs data. Every PGA is specific to a part, is specific to a manufacturer. There's the complexity as permutations that are really fantastic, and I'm really glad because you and I have been fixing this kind of stuff for a while now. But thank God for first of all, documentation hasn't been standardized in this industry for God knows why. You and I would be, I don't know, stocking shelves at Costco right now if they standardized data and it was all in one digitized form, because you could automate that in a weekend. But they don't, and they won't, and they aren't going to. So thankfully we still have jobs. But whatever words you want to use now, because for a while there, you remember back in 2016, 2017, it was all about the technology of blockchain. And blockchain is, it's new, it's
going to revolutionize.
It's going to be
revolutionize
right?
everything.
Yeah, from your from the grocery store to your dental office, and then you would get, everybody would be sending out emails associated with blockchain technology, blah blah blah. I'm the old guy who was actually around in 1993-4 when the internet started to come out. And we're all like, oh, email, electronic mail, that's kind of cool. I don't have to fax things anymore. And as soon as it caught on, everybody put a .com after their name. And it was 10 times the valuation it was the previous week for reasons beyond everybody's control. And now AI is doing the same thing. And it's funny. I know I don't look that old, right, Grant?
No, you look very old, in fact. Very old.
Well, I've been gaining a little weight lately to try and look younger. But it's the same. It's just the same tagline. It's ABC.ai. It's DEF.ai. The beautiful promise that once you, kind of pull the curtain back, isn't really there. And
well, I think that's exactly right. And that's not to diminish that the internet was totally transformative, and AI is going to be totally transformative, but not in the way that people understood it in 1994. As it's not the way, it will not be people have ideas on what's going to happen, but almost certainly it's not going to work out the way people are projecting today. We're at AI's infancy, right?
we're still going to be its slaves someday, but right now,
that's probably true. That's probably true. So, okay, so let me, I want to walk you through a high level view of the customs process, and you tell me if I have it right or if you would change things. So I want to approach it maybe from two different perspectives. I think from a broker perspective, you will receive a document packet which contains a commercial invoice, and the exercise is to convert that commercial invoice into language that CBP in the States will understand, which means you have to convert a commercial invoice that is organized by part number and by operational quantity, so eaches or dozens or whatever that, or sorry, not dozens, eaches or cases or something like that. And through a product master that is shared with you from your customer, your client, the importer themselves, you're going to translate that commercial invoice into the format that is required by customs So HTS codes, country of origin, customs quantities, value for duty, things of that nature.
I would say if you're lucky, you get a product master.
Okay.
That's many times not the case. Or if it is the case, it's a product master with a limited amount of data. So because what you're talking about is, what's the job? Whether you're a self-filer or whether you're a broker, your job is to coordinate the necessary data that is part of the customs caterer. And the customs caterer is all the coding, all the this, if, then, this, then, that, for basically what the HTS you're bringing in requires. And, the shipping data, that's pretty straightforward stuff. Most of the complexity revolves around the HTS. And so that's where the complexity also begins, because the commercial invoice doesn't touch that unless you create a product master that can take the limited amount of data from the commercial invoice and then associate it to what the caterer calls for. And there are very few product masters out there that do that. Some are pretty good. Some can provide you with the HTS, but they'll also provide you with the MID and the country of origin and things like that. But many times, as you and I have experienced, it is not customs that runs the purchasing department. The purchasing department does what they want, and they give stuff to the customs part. So they have one part number that they buy from 5 different places, right? And we have to face that all the time, because now you've got a 3-dimensional relational database on where you're trying to get your data and associate your data. So it is, that complexity, certainly it's driven first and foremost out of what customs requires, and we have to do magic tricks in order to get our software to set that up. I mean, if your goal is to be in a fully automated place.
Right. So just for clarity for those that don't understand. So the caterer is the technical documentation that CBP puts out for technology providers to be able to support the ACE system.
To transmit through the automated broker interface into ACE, you have to code it very specifically to custom specifications. You could just, call it that.
Yeah. So customs has a specification. The specification is a function of the regulation that exists that, the government has passed, that Congress has passed. And so it gets funneled down from the actual law to the regulation to the interpretations to the caterer, which is the actual technical requirement for you. That's the caterer. And so beyond that, though, one of the points that I think you made, which is very, very relevant, is that either the client is going to provide bulletproof data for you, which is complete and right, or it's going to be incomplete and sometimes not right, which requires somebody to engage on it, which is where the problem, one of the many problems exist. Is that fair?
Well, partial data is better than no data if you're trying to automate a file. For instance, if you did have a spreadsheet with your commercial invoice information on it, and you got that to load, what then likely remains? And, the list is, okay, the HTS is subject to 301, so you have to have a 99 code there, or 232, and you have to have a 99 code. It could be subject to ADD CVD, at which point, if you fall under the scope, you have to enter the case number and the duty rates for the line, things like that. And of course, there's the ever popular census quantity. What is it What is it that the Department of Commerce wants for that HTS? How many kilograms are coming in? How many numbers of units? How many dozens? All of those things. And it's very rare for an ERP to be able to kick that out, because you'd have to take not just the commercial invoice information, but you have to match it with the packing list. So the packing list kind of gets generated by your freight forwarder, once that shipment is set up to go. Whereas the commercial invoice information, which is largely just the financial, I bought 10 units for $10, that usually resides within the ERP, right? With the quirk being, the purchasing agent gives a PO, the PO's for 10 units at $10, and when it comes to what they receive, it's 9 units at $10. Doesn't match the original PO. So if you're trying to take a data feed out of an ERP, they have to match the fulfillment first before they can give it to you. Otherwise, you got bad data.
Right.
So there's a lot of challenges on that. The commercial invoice, what's good about the idea of reading the commercial invoice is when you get that is the fulfillment, right? So that's your bill. Here's what you ordered, here's what we fulfilled, and usually it's close, if not spot on. And so as the clearing agent, because that is the doc set we get, commercial invoice packing list, as well as the shipping docs, that allows you then to make entry. So the idea of getting that digitized and being able to use it, it's a good one. And obviously we're doing it now, but there's a lot else that goes on, back in the Whopper 5000 that actually turns it into a full set of customs documentation.
Right. So with a good customer, then, they're going to share with you on a periodic basis a spreadsheet, probably, that is the customer's list of product SKU and its related HTS code. Is that fair?
It's kind of the minimum that you want to get to be able to start a file effectively. Otherwise, typing it in might be faster. And of course, any kind of a spreadsheet or flat file or CSV, whatever you have, if you have multiple lines, then you're really looking at a massive time saver.
And then it's just for those of you that are not, expert in trade compliance that are listening, it's important to note that the onus on the classification resides with the importer. Is that right? Not with the customs broker?
Well, thankfully, the NCBFAA has been a wonderful lobbying agent with CBP and Congress over the many years. So technically, very little falls, if anything, to the customs broker. The way we set up our service agreements, we give you advice. You ask us for classification, we give you advice. It's not a legal standing. We're not providing legal advice. We're providing advice based on our license and based on our education and things like that. You then have to take that advice and perform your own due diligence on that. Reasonable care has always been the standard in the industry, but at the end of the day, every importer has a customs bond for the sole reason that they are the final place of compliance from a regulatory point of view. Fines, penalties, anything goes wrong, and the importer of record is the one who gets fined.
Okay, so we have the scenario then that you have an importer, and the importer is responsible for classifying and maintaining their products. And then you have what we call a transaction, but that's a shipment itself. And the broker is going to get a copy of the shipment documents, which include a packing list and a commercial invoice and the bill of lading that has a certain set of data. and they're going to triangulate based on what is on the commercial invoice and this spreadsheet and the HTS codes and supporting data in that spreadsheet to convert it into the language that is defined in the CAT's hair for what is required to file a customs entry. Is that a fair categorization of what the process is?
Yeah, you're in the ballpark there.
Okay.
All of that data gets compiled, because if you don't have a complete file that you transmit to customs, you'll get a reject, or you get an edit check. So, plus from a regulatory point of view, the legal requirements that we do have are we must have a lot of oversight over our staff and how we file entries, but we also have a regulatory requirement for bookkeeping, and we have to keep, for all the entries that we file, we have to keep the documents that we filed so that we can demonstrate to customs in an audit where we got the data to file the information that we did. Now, where that regulatory compliance then transcends to the importer is, well, they get a copy of the 7501 and they see exactly what we did. They are also required to keep the full document set and the 7501 in regards to the filing that did for them. And so, that's the same. If a broker files for you, you have to keep that. If you self-file, you have to keep it. It's the same requirement. But in a brokerage and full service environment, you as the importer are expected to review the clearance that we just did for you. You take a look at the 7501, you can see the duties and fees, you can see the HTS, you can see the entire filing. And the good thing is that even though we're in this highly regulatory environment where, we're filing electronically with customs daily, you don't pay the duty statement for 10 business days. So when you get a clearance, the day the day we send you an invoice in the 7501, you get a full kind of 2 weeks to look at that and say, oh, wait, this isn't right. That's a wrong country of origin for that, or that's the wrong HTS for that, or that's, something is amiss in the entry. And if you do that before the duty statement's paid, all we do is update that information and retransmit it. Super easy. It then generates a corrected duty statement. Let's say an HTS was wrong or something like that, a different duty rate, plus or minus. It's the way it goes. But you're expected, that's the due diligence, reasonable care that you're expected as an importer of record to do. And I think, any sophisticated company out there is doing that to some degree. They are auditing, they're reviewing statements, because it all comes back to what did purchasing, when they decided to buy that product, work into their landed cost model. They had to do all that better have done their homework before they ever purchased it, right? And we've seen people who haven't, and ends up can be a pretty ugly thing when all of a sudden it comes in and what's 301 what? You don't see a lot of that anymore, but we saw a lot of that at the beginning.
Anti-dumping what? The 300% anti-dumping?
My shipper said I wasn't subject, right?
Right.
And you're out of business because your margins are out of whack. So, finance has an expectation of what that 7501, that billing for that shipment's going to be. So, the audit and the back and forth are really important within a corporate as well as a customs regulatory environment.
So I want to tease that apart a little bit, because I feel as though there's a lot of confusion in the industry around the obligations of a customs broker and the obligations of the importer, and that it sounds very, very similar, but they're actually different exercises, and they shouldn't be confused. So the there are sort of two different things that I want to focus on. One is what is required and what is the obligation for record keeping, and the other is around audit and what you are auditing against, and again focusing on the different parties and what they can accomplish and what they're intended to accomplish by doing each. So let me try to summarize, and you can tell me where I'm right and where I'm wrong. So from an importer perspective, there is an obligation that the importer have the substantiation for the goods being imported, and that the data that is sent to customs on a 7501 and other PGA files match their corporate records. So you had mentioned earlier, a purchase order, and that a purchase order, if you issue a purchase order for $10 for 10 widgets, that when you get a commercial invoice, maybe it ought to be $10 or 10 widgets for $10 or something like that, and that would match. And then that would then be converted into a 7501, and if the HTS code had each, it should be 10 eaches, and then all of those data elements from an importer's perspective would match. And then there's going to be payment at the end of this thing from, finance. Finance is going to pay it. And all of those things tied together and ought to match. And if there's a discrepancy there, if customs were to come audit that transaction, they would find a discrepancy and question it.
That they probably wouldn't audit it that deep. If you take two steps back, the very first part of the conversation begins with the importer's right to make entry, their regulatory right. And that's an important regulation that says, do you have financial interest in this transaction? Because it's that financial interest in the commercial transaction that gives you the right to make entry as importer of record. So there needs to be a purchase order given to the shipper. The shipper then needs to, upon fulfillment of that, provide you with a commercial invoice for the payment of the goods that you gave them a PO for. And the payment for those goods needs to come from your bank account to theirs. Okay. Now, customs does audit that stuff. It's a little bit rarer, but they do. If they have questions about your right to make entry, they're going to come for your bank records. And that puts you in a weird place. But the only thing they're looking for there is the actual, I got a commercial invoice for $10,000. There's my wire for $10,000 to ABC Corp. Okay. That's what they want to see. The semantics of the bill of the commercial invoice, 10 each, adds up to, $1,000 or $10,000 or whatever that is. That's kind of an internal financial audit. Did my PO equal what the bill I got was? Customs doesn't really necessarily care about that. They're looking at, if you provided a commercial invoice or you made entry based on a commercial invoice, is that accurately set up in the data that they see for the customs entry? So a lot of that other stuff, customs isn't going to dig down that deep. That's kind of that's the importer's internal responsibility to figure out how they balance and check out for their books. From a broker point of view, we look to identify at the beginning of the relationship, do you have the right to make entry? Let us see your commercial documentation, because certain entities don't. A freight forwarder doesn't have a financial interest in the transaction. They're involved, but they don't have a financial interest. And some freight forwarders out there, or people think, oh, I'm gonna like start a trade company and I'm gonna be the importer of record and I'm gonna do it like this, and they can't. But as broker, I'm auditing I'm auditing the actual information on the documentation I have to see that it was accurately entered into the data set for the customs entry. So my audit's looking at the accuracy of how our team puts that together. But I would argue that the self-filer should be doing the same thing. Is the part number and the HTS correct? Is the total value correct? Is it subject to X? Do I have the right, 99 codes in there, et cetera?
Yeah. No, so almost certainly a self-filer should be doing a similar exercise to what a broker is doing. I guess my point is that there is a difference. So let's say you were given an erroneous commercial invoice, right? And you don't know that it's erroneous. You just get a commercial invoice for something. It would be totally reasonable for you to create a customs entry from that erroneous commercial invoice. With the information that you know.
Don't necessarily have any way to know that, right?
Correct.
I mean, you accept. I was just saying, you accept the documentation you get. Now, a commercial invoice is supposed to have some specific information on it. Commercial invoice is supposed to have the manufacturer clearly identified on there. It's supposed to have the country of origin clearly identified on there. It doesn't have to have the HTS. The description of the goods should be such that you could get to it. But, those are the basic things. Now, could people manufacture commercial invoices? It's not that hard to do. But we have no way of, there's no expectation by customs for you to audit the manufacturer to see if there is legitimacy to the commercial invoice. They probably wouldn't even talk to you.
That's right. I mean, I think that's exactly right. And so the onus of a broker is to ensure that, when they get a commercial or shipment documentation, that the process that they follow is precise to the outcome. Right? Does it match? How did a entry writer get from this commercial invoice to this output, and is it repeatable? And are we auditing to ensure that it's accurate and that we're not making mistakes? And if we are making mistakes, we're finding them and improving our system to minimize the future mistakes, and so on and so forth.
And that's where the best practice of a product list comes in, right? Because if you standardize your compliance internally, and a part number is classified, duly classified, reviewed, and you put an HTS on it, then it standardizes those future entries so that your whole team isn't doing that individually each time it comes in. It's like part number 1 equals that HTS. Away you go.
So, if you were to contrast that with the importer, they have more information than you have as it relates to what's in the shipment, what should be in the shipment, am I being sent what I expect, and so on. And so if I would say they have more, they're also getting a warehouse receipt, which you don't see anything from, right? So, if I had ordered as an importer 1,000 widgets that I expect to be in a shipment, that gets to you. You're going to make entry for 1,000 widgets, and then your job is done as a broker. And it just so happens that I only received 600 widgets, and there was a problem there. I have a problem as the importer because I have declared 1,000 widgets, but I only actually did receive 600, and I now have to make an adjustment, or perhaps even worse, I received 1,600 instead of 1,000, and now I've actually imported more than I've paid duty for, and that creates a real problem for me.
That's called smuggling. Then you're a smuggler.
Okay, right. And it's not whereas for you, the broker, you don't know any better than that. There's no expectation that you ought to know any better than that.
Well, there isn't, and you're not gonna, because the documentation that we make entry from is the actual manifested quantity. And if you don't put the correct manifested quantity in there, then you get quantity greater than the manifested, and you mess up that entry. So it's it is best to just redo your docs and then make a post summary correction on it.
Right. Right. And so the onus on the importer is actually quite a bit higher and requires a different a different level of investigation or audit, a different kind of audit. And so while both entities are auditing their process, it's a different audit. And while both entities have the requirement to retain documentation, it is to accommodate different regulation. One is for customs, you're the customs broker and you have regulation that dictates what you need to do. And the other is for the importer itself, and there's regulation around what the importer is responsible for doing, right?
Well, we're responsible for everything up to the clearance, right? So when the goods hit the port or the railhead, our job is kind of done, right? Whereas the importers isn't done until everything is accounted for and delivered to the door or the warehouse or wherever it's going. So yeah, it extends. It's a wider picture that moves outside and away from what you might call customs regulatory compliance.
Right. Now, okay, so let's switch tacks a little bit to the business case for why somebody might choose to self-file or an importer might choose to self-file versus go full service brokerage, and why maybe the corollary to that, why a broker wants to do full service brokerage and might or might not want to support doing self-filing. And again, I recognize you guys are in a bit of a
it all starts with money, though, right? The money and resources to start, and then you get into compliance and visibility. And and those are a little bit less tangible. I mean, it's hard to call compliance less tangible, but it's very clear. I have X number of resources, and I have a cost for full service, and I have a reduced cost for bringing it in-house, which of course includes my resource component. So you can say, you save 80, 90% depending on your volume by bringing it in-house, but you have to have the people to do it. Whether you're doing it all or you're doing part,
Sure. So can we, just because I'd like to get a little bit concrete here, is it fair to say, if we're going to use general numbers, of course, everybody's situation is a little bit specific given their relationship and commodities and whatever, but on average for an ocean shipment, you can say it costs $100. You're going to pay your broker $100 to do a clearance of a container. And maybe you're going to,
they're going to
charge you $25 to $30 to file an ISF if you're using somebody else, like a forwarder or broker, to file your ISF for you.
Yeah. So total file cost $125. Sure.
Right. And then if you have PGA, that's another 25 maybe. So maybe you get to 150. But those are the numbers, like as average numbers, that's what you're looking at. And now if you were to use Strix to self-file and take on the management of the file, so this is without automation, you're going to take on the clearing with like a software like Strix, you can expect to save somewhere between 80 and 90% of that fee. Is that fair?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Now so the benefit is that you're saving quite a bit of money, 80 to 90%. If you're doing, if you're doing, 2,000 containers a year, 2,000 containers times, $150 a container is, what is that? $300,000 a year, and you're going to save 80 to 90% of that. That's not an insignificant savings, right?
No,
there aren't very many places in compliance that you're going to save that kind of money.
Right, and I think you're also starting to see, you get these kind of waves where, between like 2015 and 2020, you had, the import manager would come in and go, hey, we got to cut costs here. How do we do that? A lot of different ways to do it. Customs filing is a big one in the import department. It's an easy one to hit. You get to 2020, and now we're in COVID insanity. You had a reduction in resources. At the same time, you had crazy volumes and workloads, and all of a sudden, price went out the window. Tracking took on a whole new meaning as far as trying to get a hold of things. So now we're out of all that. You're into perhaps a more normal economic environment with is a recession coming? Is it not coming? Companies are tightening their belts again. They're looking at this. And so it's I don't want to say it's back in vogue because it was never necessarily out of vogue, but the motivation to do it is normalizing. So you look then at the resources, and everyone's like, oh, do I have to be licensed? No, you don't have to be licensed. If you work for the importer, the importing company, you're an employee of that. You have the right to make entry as a self-filer. You already did. So that hasn't changed in 100 years. But many of the full service brokerage community wanted importer to think they had to be licensed. There was a lot of fear from the full service brokerage community. What, you want to self-file, you're going to get in trouble with customs, Well, that's quite a misnomer, because most of the people involved with self-filing as employees of that company are very highly knowledgeable on the products they're bringing in. In fact, you would say they're more knowledgeable than I am about the products you bring in. I don't know specifically that this widget comes out of Vietnam and that one comes out of China. You do. You intuitively know it. And so, I throw that right out the window immediately. Mm-hmm. Compliance is something that, if you work with a full service broker, you don't see everything. We've on a lot of occasions gone in and looked at ISFs when we're bringing someone into self-file an ISF, because filing an ISF is a 2-minute thing. It's so easy. It's like people look at that and they go, why didn't I do this years ago? But mm-hmm. when we're going through records, we see, hey, you had an ISF hold on this shipment. But they never knew. Because a broker never told them. Get the hold, you clear up the hold, you knock on wood and cross your fingers and hope they don't get fined. Right? Mm-hmm. So now you've got visibility into every shipment.
Well, let's talk about ISFs for a few minutes, because, we really have been focusing on customs and the customs entry. And the ISF falls into a different category. It isn't really customs business, right? It's something that maybe customs brokers do, maybe a freight forwarder does, maybe your vendor does.
Well,
but go ahead.
Well, you use the term customs business, and that's a regulatory definition. That's part of the CFR that says these things are customs business, and if they are, then you must be licensed to perform that task on behalf of another person. It's like taxes. It's like securities. You can buy your own securities through Schwab all day long for yourself, but I can't sell you securities unless I'm licensed. Okay, it's the same way in the brokerage world. You have to be a licensed broker, but you have to work for a licensed brokerage in order to do that. In order to file customs, business on behalf of an importer, and the regulations around ISF are security based. So post 9/11, U.S. Congress came out and said, "Hey, we don't know what's hitting the shores here. We want to know, and what we're going to do is create this filing with data sets for the goods before they even leave the foreign port." That way we'll know well in advance and we can stop it if we want to stop it. It was a congressional law that obviously Customs was going to be the oversight arm because they had the systems in place to make the filings, to do the oversight, to do the fines and penalties, to do it all. So it ends up in Customs' hands, even though it's not technically Customs business. And all that means is you can file the ISF from anywhere in the world. You can file on behalf of someone, as long as you have legal authority to do that through a power of attorney. And the data set itself is, as you know, quite limited and the same every time. So it's very easy to do. Very easy to kind of automate either the data that you get and templates and set that up, or actually do an actual data feed. So yeah, 2 minutes, 3 minutes to do an ISF and you're done.
And so when we're talking about ISFs, what's happened of late as it relates to Customs? I mean, as you said, the ISF's been around for more than 20 years now, right? It came out of
we were part of the
9/11
test program in 2009.
Okay, but they have, for as long as the ISF has been around, CBP has been threatening that if it's not done a certain way in a timely fashion and so on and so forth, they'll start fining companies. And that's been a threat that's been, well, let's call it a threat for a long time, with very little action that was put around it. What have you found?
I wouldn't say that anymore, yeah.
Yeah, what have you found of late as it relates to ISF?
Well, I would say that Customs no longer has a sense of humor about it at all. And especially if your goods hit the U.S. port without an ISF, you can almost be guaranteed a fine. I've seen, quote, late filings, that are past the departure date. I've seen fines for that. But, it's almost absolute that you're going to get a fine if the goods hit the customs shore. And this has been going on for a couple of years now. Their attitude has changed quite a bit. There used to be a term out there called informed compliance, where, hey, importing, we're Customs, we're great to work with. Here is documentation on what you should be doing as an importer, and please do it, and we'll give you warnings if you don't, inform you about what to do, and we want to build an educated, compliant trade. A couple of years ago, it changed to what we now call enforced compliance. Little bit harsher, little bit faster as far as the fines and penalties are concerned. So you don't want to find yourself on the wrong side of that anymore. And, Customs expects after 15 years that you need to know this. And it's rather unusual for an exporter who you're buying goods from that you're importing into the United States. They don't understand it too. Early on it was. It was tough to get data, but there's every expectation for that to occur now, and Customs will fine you, and they have been.
Right. And so, what we found, I think, is that it's becoming more interesting for importers to take control of their ISF process, because it just, like, if you're hoping that your vendor is going to do things 100% on time, it's unlikely. And when a fine occurs, it's you as the importer that's getting fined, not the vendor, right? And the exercise of trying to get it back, charge back the vendor for their non-compliance if they're the ones doing it, or your forwarder for not doing it. Those are long processes, and the fines can be hefty, right? What is it, $5,000 per infraction, up to $10,000 per shipment, or something like that?
Yeah, and the fact is, if it's a first infraction, you can mitigate that down. As a broker, you make a business decision on that. If it was your mistake, I mean, if you got the documentation on time, but you filed it late, and that resulted in a fine, you'll make the business decision to keep that business and pay it. But I think the greater reason is you don't want that to happen, period. Because when it does, that's your demerit. That's in your record. And, if your broker makes a mistake, you get the demerit. If you make the mistake, you get the demerit. Okay. If you're watching your own business and filing it yourself, you're likely to be the only concern you have from an ISF point of view. So you're probably going to get it done. And in that unlikely event where a mistake did happen, I mean, you see it at holidays, we didn't file it on time because, Jimmy was out, Jenny didn't know how to do it. Something like that happens. You want to get a mulligan from customs. And if they see something late, but they see your record's good, then you're likely to get that mulligan. But if your broker made a mistake, you got a demerit, now you're going to pay. So you really just don't want it to happen. And ISFs are so easy to do. You don't have to go through getting a filer code and a long process of getting ACH payer numbers to like you do when you file your entries, because you pay customs duties direct when you do that. You can say, I want to file my ISFs in the morning, and you could be filing by the afternoon. That's how quick you can do that.
Right. Well, this is, I think, maybe a good place to sort of end this conversation. I'm really looking forward to the next conversation we have. There's always so much to unpack as it relates to customs and the process. I mean, as you indicated, you at Strix and we at 3rd Wave have been working together for a very long time. Strix is, just to be clear and maybe make it clearer to listeners. So Strix is the ABI, what's called an ABI. It's the automated broker interface that 3rd Wave uses.
Yeah, that's our brand name.
Strix is the brand name. Yeah. But the ABI is sort of the common term for the service that Gregg Strix offers, where 3rd Wave doesn't have our own portal to customs. We use Strix as our portal to customs, and 3rd Wave does a whole lot of automation where we bring in data from different parties within the supply chain, automatically create the customs entry, and then file it through Strix. And whether it's an ISF, a customs entry, or
it's
PGA
probably a good
file,
time to. It's probably a good time to, end today's conversation and come back at a later date, because your TMS is much broader than just a customs app. You do a lot of other things that wrap other services, and the customs portion just kind of pays for that, So, happy to come back and discuss that, at your next convenience. I appreciate being on today.
So, Gregg, tell people where they can find you.
Well, we're on LinkedIn and Facebook and all of that. Strix LLC is our brand, is our the name of the company. TBI Brokers Inc. is our licensed brokerage, and you can find us in all the fun normal places out there. And if you've
your website is strixsmart.com, correct?
Yes, that's strixsmart.com. That's correct.
All right. Well, Gregg, I want to thank you for taking the time and for conveying your knowledge to our audience. We always learn a ton when you're around, so we do appreciate you and look forward to the next time.
Yeah, appreciate it. Good to see you.
Thanks for listening to 3rd Wave Trade Talks. To get in touch and learn more about what we do, visit our website at 3rdwave.co. There you'll find more resources to enrich your knowledge of global trade. Thanks again for tuning in. We'll see you next time.